Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for another of our sessions for Creative Pixel Academy sessions. Today we have one of our very esteemed guests, and also he's also an advisory board member as well at the Creative Pixel Academy. I'll leave the floor for him so that he can introduce himself. Take it away, please.
Hi, how are you all doing? My name is Marc Schaefgen. I'm an audio director in the game industry and also the audio advisor for the Creative Pixel Academy. I got started in video games in 1990, working at Origin Systems here in Austin, Texas, where I still am today after 30 years. There I started working on the Wing Commander franchise and the Ultima franchise. And yeah, from there I've gone on to work in many different places here in the Austin area. Some of the most known titles I've worked on would be Wing Commander, Ultima 7, the Turok series, The Hobbit, Area 51, and about 50 other titles that have gone in and on between there. Currently, I'm working on a VR port for Resident Evil 4, which is kind of cool. And, you know, that's pretty much me.
Great. Very stellar background. Thank you for telling us how you got into the industry. That was great. So how will you best describe what sound design is?
Well, sound design is basically it fills several different roles within games and media in general. It basically takes care of sound that is what you expect, kind of what you see is what you get kind of a scenario. But more importantly, sound design and audio in general have the power to affect the emotions of people more so than any other media, more than art, more than anything else. Music, sound really speaks to the emotions of humans. And so I kind of feel my job as a sound designer is as I'm working on games, my job is to kind of play with the emotions of the player, push them and pull them in the direction that the game designers want them to go, and provide the support for the gameplay. And yeah, that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
All right, great. When we think about sound design, are we thinking about, sometimes when we talk about art or you think about game design, it's usually more than one roles. Is sound design the same, or it's broken down into several roles as well? And what are those roles?
Well, in game development, it really depends on the budget, the size of the project, the resources available. People have done games, and I myself, where I've been the only one there doing all of the audio roles. But in a large scale project, it's generally broken down into the functional levels in the game. For instance, you have character sounds, you might have tools or weapons that the player might be using. You would have background environment, ambient kind of stuff. You would have creative things that you're doing to try to mess with the emotions of the player. Different areas, UI, UX, and then of course there's all of the technical stuff that goes with that, which is the implementation of all of those assets into the game. It doesn't end at creating a couple of sound files and tossing them over the fence. You basically have to go from creating the assets to what we call asset authoring, which is preparing them, giving them parameters and things to be implemented in the game. And then you use a game engine such as Unity or Unreal, in which you would then take those authored assets and attach them to various objects animations. That's a hard animations. Different ambient environment, going into the environment, doing markup in that. There's creating reverb volumes, editing spatialization data, surface reflections, all this kind of stuff that goes into making the final sound of the game, but it's a lot of different pieces.
Great. So it sounds like a very lengthy process in terms of from conceptualization of what the emotion you want to generate down to nailing the particular sound you want to have in the game. So what comes to mind in terms of sound design is because gaming is always by platforms, right? You have the PC, you have the console, you have the web. Is the process for designing sound, does it vary for different platforms, or is it the same general process as well?
Well, that's a good question. In the past, it's been kind of very different because of different levels of hardware capabilities. But as we converge into the golden age of gaming, we're basically, those barriers between the different levels of hardware are much different. What you can do on an Android phone or an iPhone, you can do a lot of similar things that you can do in a console. Obviously, it's not the same amount of resources and processes and whatnot, but you can get similar quality results on different platforms. And as audio professionals, we have different middleware packages that we can use that can simplify that and make things easier to port between different platforms.
Great. So we see from research that there are different, as you have mentioned also, there are Foley sounds, there are sounds associated with footsteps, there are sounds associated with running. And then in terms of categorization of these sounds, in terms in the engine, XFS, Foley, and so on. What other categories of sounds, right, will you say there is in the whole sound design process?
Well, that's really, it's kind of difficult to say. Basically, anything that happens in the game will make a sound. Any action in the world, anything that moves, anything that animates, is generally going to make a sound, unless it's a spaceship that you're trying to make silent for, accuracy or whatnot. But so we basically break down categories as needed, based on what type of game it is, what production is. Some games don't have weapons. Some games just have player tools. Some games are just puzzle solving, so you don't need any player tools. And depending upon the creative goals of the project, you might have a game that has a ton of what we refer to as Foley, but is really technically not Foley. Technically, Foley is something that's done to a picture. And we basically have absorbed that term in games to mean sounds that the player or a character may make: footsteps, arm movement, leg movement, grabbing things. And so it's really based on the type of game you're making. You may have vehicles, you may not have vehicles, you may have aircraft. There's just all sorts of categories. And generally, we don't sweat the details when it comes to that, because those things work themselves out in terms of hierarchical organization and whatnot.
Oh, so great. So I want to delve a bit into the sound organization process from getting the actual sounds. My mind went back to a video I saw of the making of Star Wars, whereby gathering the sounds for Star Wars, whereby a particular guy went around the cities and different areas like manufacturing plants and that, and with a recorder, and was holding a microphone to record the sounds. Now, if there were no, we know that game engines today have made that sound, that process a little bit different. right, and faster and time less time taking, right? But if you were creating special effects or different sounds that are not accompanied by in-game engine, would that be the process, right, that you will use?
Well, yeah, if you're making a game that's, like, I don't want to just say AAA game, but a game that has a relatively large budget to it, um, you basically, sounds that come with an engine, you may go to asset stores and things like that, and buy some things that can get you a little into places that, getting prototypes and things like that. But really, when you're making a game, most of everything is customized for that game specifically. And to that end, um, we have a tendency to use a lot of sound libraries, but actually sound libraries don't always cut it when it comes to what you need to make games. Um, there's not always the amount of variations you need in a sound library. There's also, I had to make a bowling game once. There is no real library that covers all the aspects of a bowling game. So what you have to do is what we call field recording. It's the same in TV and film, where you go out in the world and you gather your recordings with multi-track recorders and different microphones and such. For that bowling game, we called up the owner of a bowling alley, and he opened at 8 a.m. every morning. So we basically had to be there at 5:30 a.m. to get in about 2 hours of recording of all of the bowling sounds that we needed. And you wouldn't, and people are very accommodating for that kind of stuff. We we um we it can be a free kind of a thing. Generally, someone like that, we would pay for their time and the use of their facilities. um, but there's a lot of things that you can just go out in the world and get yourself. Anytime I'm on a vacation, I bring a recorder with me to kind of capture the sounds of the local area. um, I know sound designers who don't leave home without their recorder on them, because you never know what you're going to capture. A lot of folks keep a rig in their car, um, just because when you're driving around, you might see something, you might find something. I was recording sounds for a baseball game once, and we were out in the country at a baseball diamond, for kids and things like that. But we just needed to get some um, basic sounds of the around the diamond. And there was a shed that had this door that was the most squeaky door in the world I've ever heard. And sometimes you get those happy accidents where you never know what you're going to get. Sometimes you go and you plan on getting one thing and it doesn't work out for whatever. The weather isn't right, or there's too much nature going on. Insects and birds and things can be a problem sometimes. But then you get golden nuggets of things you don't expect. So yeah, to me, what makes the sound design of a game unique is gathering that unique source material that no one else has at their disposal or at their disposal. And I've been building my personal libraries for 30 years, right? So, everything we do, that we can record, that that's not for a client or a customer or somebody we're working for, we add to our personal libraries, and a lot of us trade libraries and things like that. Hey, I'll trade you some helicopter sounds for a Humvee or something like that. So it's a very important part of the process, and something we generally do during a pre-production schedule, when we know what we're going to need and we kind of know what our library has and what we need to augment it with. And so when we're in the heat of game production, we're not having to take a few days to go out in the field and record something. We've kind of had that in mind already. So yeah, when you're in the heat of battle, it's tough to just take a day off or two and go record things you need. But we add that into our schedules and plan for it appropriately.
Great. To digress a bit, sounds like from what you've explained that there is value in terms of having a network of audio programmers and sound designers too that you can relate with, and also having access to various sounds in your arsenal that you have gathered over the years your from your private life and from your leisure life as well.
Correct. And I think you hit on something very important there. The sound community in video games is kind of unlike any other. It's not the same way in film. It's just not. There's a camaraderie. There's a respect. There's a people may be competing against each other, but there's not a stab you in the back to compete against you kind of a vibe. It's very much of a friendly and great community to be a part of. And often, I'm starting a new job with as the audio director for a new studio here in Austin that has a studio in Orange County called Blind Squirrel Games. And I'm just kind of starting their audio department. So like I'm the sole person. So the fact that I've developed a network of people that I can talk to and trust and use as outsourcing and whatnot is a very important thing, because if I didn't have that community to rely on, I'd have to be, vetting people and trying to hire people and testing people. And that's just it's not something that you want to spend your time doing. You want to work with people you can trust, people who've done good work in the past, and the game industry has been around long enough that there's plenty of people out there.
Great.
And it's growing. I see job openings all the time for people looking for everything from audio directors to low-level sound people. So it's a great time to be in the industry.
Wow. So great. I mean, those are the little learnings we like taking away from these sort of sessions that could help grow the local communities or communities anywhere in the world with talents, because it is those key bits of information, those key bits of practices that we don't see because our industry is growing, that really helps us to thrive. Thank you very much for that piece. So the next question I want to ask is about the type of sounds, right, that we know. We know that there are mono, stereo, 5.1 surround sounds, and of recent binaural sounds. What's the general differentiation for all these categories? And how are they used generally in the game?
Well, basically, what you're talking there is something that we deal with a lot is perspective. Is what perspective is the audio coming to the listener? Is it coming from a 3D world? Is the player themselves making that sound? In a first-person shooter or any first-person game, the sounds are, a lot of the sound is coming from the player, and it's a fixed location for the most part. You know where that player is going to be in space in relation to what the listener position is. So generally, when you're dealing with sounds that are in the 3D world, you want to use sounds that are mono or binaural, which if you're over headphones or you're doing any kind of VR stuff, binaural is basically a process that uses phase relationships between sound and your ears to give you a more accurate 3D location of where that sound is. There's also the ambisonic format, which is another multi-channel format that is more than just 5.1. You can map it to many different types of speaker configurations. Dolby Atmos, which is not so new. It's been around for quite a while, but it's slowly being adopted for games because the homeowners are starting to add the listening environments they need to support Dolby Atmos. And Dolby Atmos is basically a 5.1 audio, or more so a 7.1 audio system. 7.1 being a difference between your side channels and your actual rear channels. So the Dolby Atmos adds speakers above you, so you have the height channels, so you can get flybys, flyovers, and things like that. So it really depends on the perspective of what you're trying to deliver. In game, we use, again, a lot of mono sounds in that Dolby Atmos scenario would be panned and moved around the player's head, or following objects that are in the game. If a bullet whizzes by your head, that's going to be a sound object that is tracked through that system. And then for music, we may do 5.1 or 7.1 or even more mixes that are stagnant, that don't move around a whole lot, maybe. Or they do move around a lot, but it's basically a linear thing where it's not controlled by what the player is actually doing second to second. It's controlled. You'll control music by their decisions in an interactive situation, but it's not like the player is making these sounds like he's using a tool or something. So we have what we call kind of beds, which are things that are linear, like music. And then we have objects that are 3D in the world. And then we have things that are UI-based objects, depending upon how you're implementing UI. It could be 5.1 for those sounds, or it could just be mono. You could be, if you're in VR, a lot of your UI is 3D. So it needs to be in the 3D world. If you make a sound here, it needs to sound like it's coming from that position. So basically, we use all of those different types of audio formats in concert together to create the final product based on the perspective that we need to hear that sound from.
Great. Very well explained. I mean, after today, I'm sure that I won't have a confusion about what binaural audio 5.1 or 7.1 sounds means. And I'm sure our community, our learning community, won't have that. And the clarity you provided is great. So I just wanted to know, in implementing sounds, right, in designing and implementing sounds, are there any pitfalls that people should look out for?
It's really difficult to say that, because it all depends on the genre of game you're doing. I'd say the biggest pitfall and the biggest mistake I see people make from time to time is not bringing in audio team early enough in the process of the game development. It's something that we've been harping on and trying to push to people for, gosh, since I've been doing it, 25 years at least. Almost every large scale developer understands that. And they, if you're making a AAA game, your audio team is going to be there from the get-go. But smaller budget teams have a tendency to think that as soon as I engage an audio person, I've got to pay that person a bunch of money to make sound for my game. But it's very important to bring on somebody early to consult, because you can make a lot of mistakes as a developer that doesn't really understand audio before you decide to bring in the audio professional. And a lot of times that audio professional ends up having to correct a lot of those mistakes, and it costs people more money than if they would have brought that person on early to do consulting. And just because you're there early on in the process does not mean you have to be there for the entire length of the game, especially in independent development and lower budget products. If you're an indie game developer and you plan on a 1-year development cycle, well, you should bring that audio guy in from day one, and then they might start actually doing a lot of work maybe 6 months later, but you need that communication. You need those pre-production phases so everybody knows what they're doing. And if you don't have an audio expert there for those phases, you're going to make mistakes and you're going to miss things. And I've seen it happen time and time again.
Wow. Thank you for that as well. So can you just share any words of wisdom with our learning community?
The biggest thing I can say in terms of words of wisdom is, all projects are different. So being specific is really not appropriate. But the one thing I've seen time and time again is that people don't bring in their audio team early enough on the project. Large budget titles, AAA games, they know the power of this. They know they have to do it. But smaller budget games don't always think they have the budget to bring the audio people on early enough. And that's actually the opposite, because a lot of what happens is if you don't bring that person on early enough without an audio expert on your team, you're going to make mistakes that later that audio person you do bring in is going to have to correct. And that's going to cost you money. It's well worth the spend to bring in somebody from day one for communication and consultation, doing pre-production, setting up your pipelines, so that when it's time for that person to come on full time and really contribute to the project, there aren't a lot of issues to deal with or hurdles to get over.
Great. Thank you very much for your insights and also sharing your experience with us. We like to, when we reach the end of our sessions, we like to ask most of us, our speakers, if they could give like a tool dump, free tool dump or resource that they could share with our learning community. So do you have any particular one you would like to share?
Well, when it comes to digital audio workstations, people have a lot of choices, and people use what they're familiar with and what makes their life easier. To that end, there are different tools, different workstations that are kind of empowered for games a little bit. One of those is Nuendo by Steinberg. It is integrated into the Wise platform, which I'll talk about a little later. Another one is called Reaper. Reaper is very scriptable and customizable, and you can do a lot of things in there to speed up your process when it comes to making lots of variations, naming assets, remixing, putting things back in the game. But my suggestion is to work with what you know, and if you have time, learn some of these other DAWs that are a little more tied specifically to what game audio people need to do. On that note, there is some audio middleware out there that also makes doing games a lot easier. One of those is called FMod Studio, and another one is called Wise, made by Audio Kinetic. Wise is, to me, the flagship of the audio middleware. It does a lot in terms of control of sound and making it easier for people to debug things and figure out resources and basically just control the sound in their games. And when I talked about authoring sound before, the Wise tool is kind of what I had in mind in terms of preparing your game assets to be played back by a game engine. And when it comes to game engines, it's, Unreal, Unity are the top ones, and they're free for anybody to download and mess around with. If you're thinking about getting into games and you haven't checked out Unreal or Unity, then you're not really on the pulse of what's happening. Everybody in all the schools, all the people that are doing it by themselves, a lot of them are using these engines, and the web has a wealth of information on how to use these tools. Anytime somebody asks me, I want to get into games, what should I do? I tell them, download Unreal, download Unity, make a game, do something. Just get in there and do it. Don't sweat the details too much. You'll figure things out as you go along. When it comes to audio specifically, again, if you're not familiar with Wise or FMod, then you should be, if making games and audio for games is something you want to do, because they not only help in terms of speeding up your production and making it easier to make great sound, but they show you, by using these tools, you learn what you need to do at the same time in making games, going through tutorials. Again, the web has a wealth of information on all of these different tools. So yeah, my advice for people is there, if you want to make games, make games. The tools are out there. It's not difficult. You need a machine. That's the barrier. You need a high-powered machine.
Thank you very much, Marc Schaefgen. This has been a quite insightful session. I hope your experience has actually come across as someone who's been long inside the industry and can share that experience with our community. We thank you very much for coming on the Creative Pixel Academy session today. And so it's a wrap for Creative Pixel Academy for the year 2021. Look forward to more of our course content towards 2022, which promises to be exciting. So from me, in Creative Pixel Academy, Benedict Olumese, thank you for joining us, and bye-bye.